Millionaire's wedding was ruined when his ex entered with their secret child. Welcome to a story steeped in heart-stopping drama, deep-seated secrets, and the harsh lessons of hidden consequences. Today, you'll witness the unraveling of a grand society wedding that was set to be the event of the year until an uninvited guest stepped through the doors, bringing to light the kind of truth that refuses to stay buried. This gripping tale, Millionaire's wedding was ruined when his ex entered with their secret child, will plunge you into a whirlwind of lavish celebrations, guarded pasts, and the immediate karma that arrives at the most inopportune moment. So, settle in for a suspenseful ride as destiny finally catches up to deceit. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Anthony Chambers was, by any definition, a self-made powerhouse. At 35, he had ascended from humble beginnings to the lofty rank of millionaire entrepreneur, credited with transforming niche startups into major players in fields as varied as renewable energy and real estate. Newspapers hailed him as a modern visionary. His presence was courted at every high society function. Those who knew him described Anthony as a man of charm, business acumen, and an unwavering belief that life was his for the taking. Yet, there was a shadow cast upon his dazzling successes, a shadow few ever dared mention. Anthony had a past that he'd painstakingly worked to conceal. In college, before his meteoric rise, he'd been deeply in love with a woman named Diana Brooks, a gifted artist who had believed in his potential long before anyone else. They laughed over weekend ramen dinners when money was tight and dreamed of a future built on shared ideals. But as Anthony's star rose, so did his ambition and his impatience with anything that didn't align with his career goals. When Diana found herself pregnant and turned to Anthony for support, she was met with a cold refusal. Timing was impossible. According to him, he was on the cusp of a major breakthrough. Without warning, he ended things, leaving Diana heartbroken and determined never to rely on him again. Time marched on, and Diana quietly stepped out of Anthony's orbit. She supported herself through her painting commissions and took on a few side jobs, scraping together a modest living. She never forgot Anthony's betrayal, nor did she forget to inform him, through one of his old college friends, that she had safely delivered a baby boy named Michael. But Anthony, enthralled by new business ventures and fame, never bothered to respond. For him, fatherhood was a snag in his carefully curated life, and so he pretended no child existed. A decade later, Anthony Chambers was the talk of town once again, but this time for his upcoming nuptials to Vanessa Whitmore, heiress to one of the largest hotel empires in the country. The Whitmore name held tremendous sway, and the union promised not just romance, but the merging of two influential families. Society pages breathed excitement into every detail: the wedding venue at the Ritz-Carlton on Central Park South, the rumored Tiffany and Company ring that sparkled on Vanessa's hand, and the hush-hush negotiations about how this marriage might strengthen ties between Anthony's companies and the Whitmore Hotels empire. Indeed, it was less a wedding than a business merger disguised in white lace and silk. Vanessa was every bit the refined, self-assured bride. Tall, elegant, with just the right mix of sweet manners and business savvy, she carried herself like royalty. Though some speculated she might be more in love with Anthony's potential than with Anthony himself, no one dared voice such an opinion aloud. The Whitmore family's influence was sprawling, and the synergy between her father's connections and Anthony's entrepreneurial brilliance could catapult their combined fortunes into the stratosphere. Anthony, for his part, viewed the wedding as the crowning achievement of his personal and financial empire. He had spent months perfecting details for the event, desperate to ensure everything reflected his impeccable taste and his unstoppable success story. He insisted on the finest floral arrangements flown in from half a world away, a private jazz quartet whose set list he had personally vetted, and a day of timeline so precise he practically had it memorized. If all went well, the marriage to Vanessa would further solidify his status among the business elite. Little did he know that behind the scenes, a chain of events was about to unfold, triggered by forces he once coldly brushed aside. Diana Brooks, having spent the last decade building a modest but stable life, discovered that her son, Michael, was going through difficulties that fatherless children sometimes encounter, especially around role models. He had begun asking about his dad more insistently, noticing that other boys had fathers at their soccer matches, at school events, helping with science projects. Unwilling to drown her child's natural curiosity, Diana found herself in a moral bind. She had never actively hidden from Anthony, but she also had not forced her way into his new life. She knew of his engagement thanks to tabloids one day. While flipping through social media, she stumbled across photos of the beaming couple at a pre-wedding gala. She recognized that face from years past, the man who once fueled her dreams and then shattered them. Whether it was heartbreak or maternal resolve, something in Diana snapped. Michael deserved at least a chance to decide for himself whether he wanted a relationship with his father. Diana was determined that Anthony face his responsibilities. She could no longer sit in silent acceptance while Anthony continued to live unscathed by the emotional wreckage he had left behind. So she made a decision, one that would set the stage for a confrontation as dramatic as any society scandal could conjure. On a crisp Saturday morning, the day of the wedding, the staff at the Ritz-Carlton buzzed with excitement. Catering crews bustled to assemble extravagant canapes. The event planner triple-checked the floral arches, and the wedding coordinator scurried about to ensure the bride's every request was met. Photographers tested their lighting setups in the sun-drenched ballroom, festooned with columns of gleaming white roses. The bride's side of the wedding party arrived early, occupying a luxurious suite overlooking Central Park, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows. Vanessa sipped champagne with her bridesmaids, doing last-minute selfies for her Instagram story. Anthony, ensconced in a separate suite, quietly went over the day's timeline with his best man, Jonas. Despite his outward calm, Anthony's nerves hummed. He was about to step into a union that wasn't purely about love. The stakes of merging with the Whitmore empire weighed heavily on his mind. He inhaled, exhaled, and repeated a mantra: "This is the final piece. After today, everything will be perfect." Unknown to him, Diana Brooks and a 10-year-old Michael were already in the city. They had arrived the night before, checking into a modest midtown hotel. Diana had wrestled with guilt and anxiety for days, unsure whether to barge into Anthony's life again after so long. But whenever she looked at Michael's face, his bright eyes, and the reflection of a father he had never met, she felt renewed conviction. She had attempted to contact Anthony's office under the guise of an old friend needing to speak with him before the wedding, but she was stonewalled by polite yet unyielding staff. So here she was, with no official invitation or plan beyond telling Anthony the truth that she and Michael would no longer be ignored. As the clock ticked toward the ceremony, guests began to arrive by chauffeured cars, stepping onto red-carpeted paths. They donned elegant suits, glittering evening gowns, and exchanged air kisses in front of the main entrance, photographed by the press. Within the grand ballroom, a hush fell as the string quartet performed a soft melody to set the ambience. Anthony's mother, A dignified woman who was proud of her son's achievements took her seat in the front row. On the other side, Vanessa's father, Henry Whitmore, loomed an imposing figure who exuded wealth and power with each measured step. Then, in the midst of this orchestrated pageantry, the large doors at the ballroom entrance swung open. A hush of confusion spread through the gathering because standing there was a woman not dressed in wedding finery, accompanied by a young boy who clutched her hand. The staff recognized that they were definitely not on the guest list. Security guards tensed, but the woman's eyes brimmed with determined purpose. She calmly asked to speak to Anthony. When a guard insisted they remove themselves or face ejection, Diana's voice rose not in hysterics, but in firm resolve. If Anthony Chambers knew who I am, he would want me here. Her unwavering stance caught the attention of a few guests near the entrance, and, in typical domino fashion, the chatter spread. Soon, Jonas, Anthony's best man, hurried toward the commotion to see what the fuss was about. The moment Jonas spotted Diana, someone he vaguely remembered from Anthony's college days, his heart skipped. Over the years, Jonas had suspected there was a child in the picture, but Anthony had always brushed aside the rumors. The best man swallowed hard, uncertain about whether to forcibly remove Diana or risk letting her slip inside. "Diana, you're not supposed to be here," Jonas whispered, stepping out into the corridor to intercept her before she caused a full-blown scene. She squared her shoulders. "I won't leave until I speak to him. This is his son." A subtle tremor coursed through her voice, but she held her ground. Beside her, Michael watched with wide eyes, holding on to his mother. Jonas's gaze flicked to the boy, taking in the uncanny resemblance, a swirl of Anthony's features in that youthful face. Jonas inhaled. The truth was obvious. Now, Jonas managed, glancing at his watch. The ceremony was due to start within the hour. The timing could not be more disastrous. Diana's lips quivered. "I tried for years. Letters, calls, messages through mutual friends. He never answered. He's forced my hand." Jonas hesitated. He could see the determination in her gaze. Perhaps, if Anthony confronted the truth privately, they could avoid a major disruption. Jonas finally nodded. "All right, come with me. I'll bring you to a side room. But don't make a scene in front of the guests." They followed him down a quiet corridor into an antechamber, a space filled with extra chairs and wedding paraphernalia. Jonas motioned them inside, telling them to wait, then hurried off to find the groom. Meanwhile, outside, the unsuspecting wedding machine kept humming. Bridesmaids adjusted their dresses, guests took their seats, and the officiant prepared his notes for the grand ceremony. Anthony stood in front of an ornate mirror in his dressing suite, adjusting his cufflinks. He felt a surge of nerves that had been building all morning. Just then, Jonas burst in, breathless. "We have a problem," he said, pulling Anthony aside so the wedding staff in the room couldn't overhear. Anthony's mouth tightened at Jonas's urgent tone. "What is it?" "Diana Brooks is here, with a boy." Jonas paused, searching for the right words. "Anthony, he looks just like you." The color drained from Anthony's face. The name he had all but banished from his memory hammered at the walls of his carefully constructed life. Diana was the only woman he truly felt he had wronged in his past, but he had never expected her to show up. His pulse roared in his ears. "Does Vanessa know?" "Not yet. I took them to a side room." Jonas lowered his voice. "She's demanding to see you." Anthony's first impulse was to order security to remove her from the premises, but the gravity in Jonas's expression gave him pause. He clenched his fists. If she was indeed with a child that resembled him, this situation would be 1,000 times more explosive if it reached the Whitmores. If something as devastating as fathering a secret child came out in the midst of the wedding, the humiliation would be unstoppable, and that was to say nothing of the potential fallout for the deals and partnerships hinged on the marriage. "Okay," Anthony muttered. "I'll talk to her, alone." Jonas nodded, relief etched in his features. The two men quietly slipped away from the commotion, heading to the designated antechamber. Anthony's heart drummed a thunderous beat as he entered. The second he crossed the threshold, he locked eyes with Diana. An ocean of unspoken sentiments surged between them, her heartbreak, his ambition, the quiet knowledge that he had never truly atoned for the cruelty of their past. The boy, Michael, gazed at Anthony with a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. "Diana," Anthony said, swallowing the tightness in his throat. "Why are you here?" She steadied herself. "Anthony, I've tried for years to contact you. You know that. You ignored every outreach. I won't let Michael go on pretending he doesn't have a father." A swirl of conflicting emotions knotted in Anthony's chest. He snuck a glance at Michael, slight build, hair the same shade of dark brown he himself had at that age. The boy's eyes brimmed with innocence, but also a hint of sadness that no 10-year-old should bear. "Look, the wedding is starting soon. This isn't the time," Anthony began, sounding almost frantic. "This should have been addressed long before the wedding," Diana retorted. "But you refused. Today, if you want me gone, then at least acknowledge him. Look him in the eye and decide what kind of man you really are." Anthony's throat went dry. The desire to preserve his perfect wedding warred against a flicker of guilt in his conscience. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Diana's expression grew fierce. "I don't need your money, Anthony. We've managed without you all this time. But Michael deserves to know the truth. He wants to meet you to see if you're the father he's imagined. If you can't give him a genuine relationship, then say so. But I won't let you keep pretending he doesn't exist. Not anymore." Michael fidgeted by Diana's side, eyes darting between them. The tension in the room crackled like distant thunder. Anthony looked at the child's face, so desperately reminiscent of his own reflection, and something cracked within him, an emotion he had suppressed for years. But standing in the back of his mind was the knowledge that if he accepted the boy publicly, the wedding and the business deal could unravel. The Whitmores prided themselves on image, tradition, and spotless reputations. Before he could gather a coherent response, a voice echoed from the hallway. "Anthony." The bride's mother, Regina Whitmore, stood by the open door, confusion etched across her refined features. She noticed the small group, recognized the tension. Jonas lurched forward, trying to close the door, but it was too late. Regina had already glimpsed the boy who looked strangely like Anthony. "What is going on?" Regina demanded, stepping into the room with an air of stifled indignation. She recognized Diana as clearly not one of the wedding staff or guests. She had a mother's intuition for trouble. "Anthony, who is this?" Caught off guard, Anthony stammered. I was just discussing a personal matter." He tried to usher Regina out, but her eyes traveled to Michael, whose youthful face betrayed a swirl of emotions. Regina's gaze snapped back to Anthony. In a flash, she realized the significance of the moment. The color drained from her cheeks. Seizing the advantage, Diana spoke with measured clarity. "I'm Diana Brooks. This is my son, Michael, and Anthony is his father." Regina's face contorted in disbelief. She stared at Anthony, expecting him to refute the claim, but his silence spoke volumes. With trembling composure, she turned on her heel. "I must inform Vanessa." Her voice was crisp. She paused at the threshold. "And my husband." That was all she said before storming away, leaving a hush of foreboding in her wake. Anthony felt the walls closing in. "You've destroyed me," he hissed at Diana. "You should have waited." Diana's eyes flared. "I tried to reach you. You never listened. Don't you dare blame me for the mess you created." Anthony spun around, pushing past Jonas, chasing after Regina in a desperate attempt to contain the fallout. Diana stood there, chest heaving, feeling Michael's small fingers tighten around her arm. She glanced at Jonas, who gave her a helpless shrug and offered only, "Wait here, please," before following Anthony. The entire wedding atmosphere shifted like a sudden shift in weather. In a matter of minutes, the orchestrated elegance gave way to a frantic hush. Guests sensed something was amiss, whispers spread, anxious glances flickered. Vanessa, who had been in a private suite adjusting her train, watched her mother rush in, pale as a ghost, murmuring something that caused the bride's eyes to widen and her face to twist in stunned horror. Moments later, Anthony appeared, nearly breathless, trying to calm them. Vanessa demanded an explanation, voice trembling with uncontainable fury. "Is it true? Do you have a 10-year-old child?" Anthony didn't answer immediately, which was confirmation enough. Something in Vanessa cracked. She had always known Anthony was ambitious, even ruthless in his business dealings, but she had never suspected him of burying a child's existence. The bride's father, Henry Whitmore, was equally aghast. Tall and imposing, he pinned Anthony with a glare that could wither steel. "You have disgraced our family's name with your deceit. Did you really believe you could conceal a child forever?" Anthony tried to speak, but only disjointed explanations tumbled out. I wasn't sure. We parted ways in college. I never acknowledged it." It was so long ago, Vanessa's face flamed. "So you left a woman alone to raise your son while you paraded around as some golden bachelor? And I'm only hearing this now, moments before the ceremony?" She looked ready to hurl her bouquet across the suite. The swirl of white satin and delicate lace around her felt suddenly heavy and stifling. Henry Whitmore, fists clenched, turned to his daughter. "We cannot go forward with this, Vanessa. This is a scandal. It reflects poorly on us, on our hotel empire, on everything we stand for." Anthony, flush with desperation, tried to salvage the moment. "Vanessa, please listen to me. I can fix this. Let's handle it discreetly. The ceremony can still happen, and we'll release a statement after the honeymoon." Vanessa cut him off, her eyes brimming with tears and rage. "Do you think everything can be spun to your advantage? This isn't some PR fiasco you can manage with clever wording. This is a child's life you've been ignoring." Her words slapped Anthony with a profound sense of shame, but also fear. Fear of losing the Whitmore alliance, fear of public humiliation, fear that his meticulously built empire would come crashing down. "Vanessa," he murmured, stepping forward to take her hand. She yanked it away. He glanced at Henry Whitmore, whose stern face showed no mercy. "I have half a mind to call security," Henry said icily. "But first, we must end this travesty of a wedding. The guests are here, and rumors are already spreading. Indeed, outside in the main foyer, confusion and tension swirled. Distant relatives whispered about a child. Staff overheard fragments of the confrontation, and the orchestral music seemed ominously off-key. The final blow came when Henry summoned the wedding planner and quietly instructed her to announce that the ceremony was indefinitely postponed. Panic rippled among the guests, and the rumor mill churned with a fervor that threatened to overshadow any attempt at subtlety. Within minutes, the news broke that the wedding was cancelled. The crowd in the ballroom, some of them brandishing smartphones, demanded answers. Vanessa's mother, Regina, huddled with her daughter and Henry, forming a protective circle away from prying eyes. Anthony was effectively shut out, left to pace in the corridor with Jonas, grappling for a solution that would rescue both his reputation and his partnership with the Whitmores. Just then, like a final, devastating twist of fate, Diana emerged with Michael, escorted by a pair of security guards. They had insisted on removing her from the premises, but Vanessa, upon hearing that the woman and child were being escorted out, intervened. A sudden wave of boldness swept over the bride. She wanted to see the truth for herself, to see the face of the boy whose existence had just shattered her illusions. "Bring them here," she commanded, her voice resonating with quiet authority. The security guards reluctantly complied, leading Diana and Michael into the corridor near the suite. Anthony hovered anxiously as Vanessa approached Diana. "You're the ex," Vanessa said, her tone layered with hurt and accusation. "You're the mother of his child?" Diana nodded, meeting Vanessa's gaze steadily. "Yes, I never wanted to ruin your wedding, but I tried for years to speak to Anthony privately. He refused to listen." Vanessa's features softened slightly, enough to show pity for Diana's plight. She glanced down at Michael, who avoided her eyes. She knelt, meeting his height. "Hello, Michael," she said gently, pushing aside her own swirling emotions. "I'm sorry this is happening." "It must be confusing." Michael nodded. "Are you his wife?" Vanessa's face contorted as she searched for words. "No, I'm not sure what I am anymore." The bride's father, Henry, stood behind her like a sentinel, arms crossed. "We can't allow this. The wedding is off. Our family's name will not be tarnished," he declared sternly, even though the scandal was already unstoppable. A hush blanketed the onlookers, including staff members gathered at a respectful distance. In that charged moment, everything came crashing down for Anthony Chambers. The immediate karma was brutal. The Whitmores, outraged and feeling deceived, withdrew not just from the wedding, but from any future business ventures. Vanessa, tears streaming, turned her back on him for good. And as for Diana, she watched him with an expression that mixed vindication with sorrow. Here was the man who once dismissed her pleas and the existence of their child, now forced to grapple with the loss of his golden alliances. Anthony felt dizzy with regret. He had intended to come clean about his past. Eventually he even told himself he would handle it at the right time, but the right time never seemed to arrive. Now the consequences crashed on him like a tidal wave, unstoppable and indiscriminate. After the formal cancellation of the wedding, guests poured out of the Ritz-Carlton in a flurry of confusion. Some outraged at the abrupt shift, others surreptitiously checking their social media feeds for any clues. Reporters and photographers smelled blood in the water, crowding outside the Grand Hotel's entrance to capture the meltdown of the wedding of the year. Anthony's name trended on various platforms, paired with speculation about a secret child, a jilted bride, and the explosive fall of a high-flying businessman. The once lavish event turned into a carnival of scandal. Henry Whitmore issued a terse statement on behalf of his family. The Whitmores will not be moving forward with the planned alliance. We offer no further comment at this time. The press devoured his silence as an admission that something had gone terribly wrong, a detail they didn't hesitate to fill with sensational rumors. Meanwhile, Anthony hovered in a side corridor with Jonas. "This is a disaster," Anthony said, his voice trembling. "The deals, the expansions, my entire future. With the Whitmores, it's over." Jonas, who had always known a measure of Anthony's buried guilt, exhaled heavily. "Maybe you should focus on doing the right thing by your son, for once. Everything else is secondary now." Anthony sank against a wall, pressing a hand to his face. "I've ruined everything," he muttered, though whether he was referring to his lost wedding or his fractured relationship with his son remained unclear. Jonas laid a comforting hand on his shoulder, but Anthony shrugged it off, too consumed by panic and remorse. Diana, deciding it was time to go, took Michael by the hand and headed for the exit, flanked by some of the hotel's security staff. Suddenly, Anthony's voice echoed behind her. "Wait." She turned. He approached, haggard. I'm sorry for all of this, for ignoring you, for shutting you out." He glanced at Michael, who stared up at him with cautious curiosity. "I don't know what else to say, except that I want to try to be part of his life, if you'll let me." A swirl of conflicting emotions twisted Diana's features. She had long dreamed Anthony would one day realize the magnitude of what he had abandoned, but she never truly believed it would happen. "We'll see," she said quietly. That's Michael's decision as much as mine. Michael peered at Anthony, trying to make sense of this tall stranger who shared his genes. He didn't say a word, only shifted closer to his mother. Anthony reached out as if to place a hand on Michael's shoulder, but paused. "I understand," Anthony murmured. "You don't owe me anything, but I want to show you both that I'm not the same person I was." Diana studied him. "Prove it," she said, then turned and left. The immediacy of her departure felt like a final judgment, but also a small opening for redemption. In the months that followed, Anthony Chambers underwent a public fall from grace. Stripped of the Whitmore alliance, he faced major financial setbacks. Other potential investors, spooked by rumors of scandal and personal drama, distanced themselves. Business deals were stalled or cancelled outright. The press, always eager to pounce on a downfall, published sensational headlines about how the mighty had fallen. Even more challenging for Anthony was the internal reckoning he faced. Every day he woke to a mixture of regret and longing for the chance to salvage a relationship with the son he barely knew. Previously, he had always found comfort in burying himself in work, in forging ahead with expansions, acquisitions, and new ventures. But now, with deals evaporating faster than he could salvage them, he was forced to confront the personal emptiness that remained. Eventually, he managed to track Diana down through mutual acquaintances. She was polite, if not welcoming. She agreed to let Anthony meet Michael on neutral ground, a quiet diner near her apartment in Queens. The day of their first meeting, Anthony arrived early, a bundle of nerves he was unaccustomed to feeling. Usually, it was the other way around. He held the power, and others waited on him. But now he realized his fate in fatherhood depended on forging a real bond with a child who might want nothing to do with him. When Diana and Michael stepped inside, Anthony stood awkwardly. He had a small gift, a soccer ball, knowing from Jonas that Michael played for a local team. The boy approached uncertainly. They slid into a booth. Anthony tried to smile. "Hi," he said quietly. I'm your dad." Michael's expression wavered between curiosity and reservation. He cast a quick glance at Diana, who nodded encouragement. Slowly, the tension eased. They talked, at first in stilted phrases, about Michael's school, his favorite hobbies, and the video games he liked. Anthony listened intently. It was new for him to be a listener rather than the star of the conversation. He felt something shift inside, an unaccustomed warmth, a longing to be good enough for this bright-eyed boy. Diana observed with a mixture of caution and hope. She could see an earnestness in Anthony's manner that hadn't been there all those years ago. Perhaps the immediate karma of losing his wedding, fracturing his public image, and facing the condemnation of the elite had stripped away the arrogance that once ruled him. She wasn't ready to forgive him overnight, but she saw glimmers of sincerity. A few more meetings followed. Michael remained reticent, but he smiled more often. After a while, they played soccer together in a local park. Anthony struggled to keep up at first. He was more accustomed to boardrooms than playgrounds. But he persevered, and Michael laughed when Anthony slipped on the grass. That laugh, so free and genuine, was like a small victory to Anthony. He recognized this as the most authentic sense of fulfillment he'd had in years, more than any corporate accolade or million-dollar deal could provide. During one of these outings, Anthony finally gathered the courage to address Diana more directly. As Michael dashed off to retrieve the ball, Anthony turned to her. "I want to help," he said. "With his education, his hobbies, whatever you need." She studied him warily. "He's my priority. If you vanish again, it'll break his heart, and I won't allow it." Anthony nodded, guilt pressing down. "I understand. I won't vanish. I promise." For once, he meant every word. He realized with sudden clarity that if life had given him an out, some alternate timeline where he had never met Diana, never fathered Michael, he would reject it now. He wanted to be in his son's life. The tragedy was that it had taken a massive downfall to awaken him to this truth. Over time, rumors about Anthony Chambers's fatherhood scandal quieted. The media moved on to fresher tabloid fodder. The Whitmores continued their grand expansions without him. Vanessa, after dealing with the heartbreak and public embarrassment, eventually found new outlets for her ambitions. Anthony, meanwhile, worked doggedly to rebuild his career from the rubble, not at the breakneck pace of before, but with a newfound sense of balance. He also started seeing a therapist, attempting to unpack the layers of guilt, shame, and the fear of failure that had haunted him. Diana noticed the subtle shifts, the humbler way he carried himself, the gentler tone he used when addressing Michael. She allowed him to pick Michael up from school occasionally, to help with errands, to participate in the boy's life. The steps were small and incremental, but each was more meaningful to Anthony than any corporate milestone. Slowly, father and son formed a bond. Michael grew more at ease, asking Anthony about his work, about his childhood, about why he had left them. The conversations were difficult, but necessary. Anthony never shied away from admitting he had been wrong, that he had messed up badly. Over time, Michael's guarded heart began to trust. Months later, on a summer afternoon, Michael had a championship soccer game in his local youth league. Diana stood in the bleachers, scanning the crowd for Anthony, uncertain whether he would show up. Just as the match was about to begin, she spotted him jogging toward them, a determined look on his face. He had come straight from a last-minute business pitch for a new investor, tie half loosened, hair slightly disheveled, but resolute in his promise to be there. Michael noticed him too, and his face lit up in an irrepressible grin. That moment, more than any exchange of words, proved to Diana that Anthony was no longer the man who had once turned his back on them. Maybe the future was uncertain, but for now, father and son were forging a new path, one built on acceptance, vulnerability, and a sense of responsibility that Anthony had long ignored. It wasn't the life he initially envisioned, with a glamorous bride and an endless expansion of wealth. But in the aftermath of everything that had gone wrong, Anthony Chambers finally felt he might be setting something right. The wedding that never happened was a heavy price to pay, but perhaps it was the immediate, necessary karma to crack open his conscience and guide him toward what truly mattered. Thank you for joining us on this high-stakes journey, where ambition collided with a past that demanded reckoning. We saw how one unexpected entrance at a grand wedding turned every carefully scripted moment into chaos, paving the way for a deeper exploration of regret and redemption. Sometimes life's twists may appear cruel, yet they offer a chance to right our wrongs and become better versions of ourselves. If you found this story as gripping as it was heartbreaking, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Your support encourages us to continue creating stories that remind us truth can't stay hidden forever, and real responsibility comes at the most unanticipated moments.